Alright. Hello, YouTube. It's Sunday again, and I'm back with another video, but this time I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to try to shoot this whole video in one take, no edits. It's just something I want to try. So, the topic today has to do with working with people with autism. My job is as a managing instructor at a local nonprofit. We provide different classes, programs, and resources for people on the autism spectrum and their families. We work with all ages, and we're actually also available to those who aren't affected by autism as well. But most of our clients are people who have been affected by autism in some way. This video is just going to be a brief, well, hopefully a brief reflection on my experience with working with autistic people so far. Back in December of 2023, I started a new job at this local nonprofit as a program assistant or a teaching assistant. We are not a school, but we do offer, as I said, a lot of different classes, programs, and recreational activities. So sometimes we are kind of like a school, right? Our classes have a facilitator, we have students, obviously, and then we have assistants who support as needed, kind of like a school setting, right? But we don't do grades. There's no passing or failing, right? Students can take whatever classes we offer over and over and over again. And we have a lot of students who do take the same classes every term. We operate year-round, by the way. We don't have we don't have summers off, though our calendar is somewhat aligned with the school system here. Anyways, before I go on too much of a tangent, which I tend to do, I want to share the positives that I've gained from working with people with autism, and I want to share some challenges as well. So as I mentioned, I started as a program assistant, but back in, I believe, April of this year, I got promoted to a managing instructor role. So I teach a lot of classes, like financial literacy, or like independent living skills, or running, basketball, kind of a wide spectrum. I also still assist in some classes as well. I assist in field trip-based classes, cooking, etc. And I also have some supervisory responsibilities for the team. But again, I don't want to branch off too much. I do want to say that I mainly work with our 18 and up population. So as I said, we offer classes and programming to students of all ages, from 0 to however old. We have students in their 50s, in their 30s, in their 40s, but the bulk of the clientele that I work with are in their 20s, so close to my age. They're in that transition phase, right, after high school, but sort of pre-adulthood, whatever that means. Like, they finished high school, and they're not really sure concretely, like, what's next, right? Is it employment, supported employment? Is it college? Is it something else? So, in a nutshell, that's kind of the gist of my job. But I want to get into the positives and the challenges, because that's going to be the crux of the video. So the first positive that I've gained from working with this organization, working with people with autism, is that some of our students have such a pure, like, childlike, innocent quality to them that you can't help but just be joyful when you're around them, right? They bring out that inner child in you that you've maybe buried, as you've gotten older, as we tend to do when we get older, right? life gets a little heavier and it's maybe harder to be somewhat lighthearted. But we have a lot of students who just exude this purity, as I mentioned, where you can't help but smile when you're around them, right? And this sort of just working with people with autism kind of forces you to see human beings from a different perspective, because our students operate from a different vantage point, right? A lot of them don't really ascribe to the same norms that maybe neurotypical, whatever that means, people kind of ascribe to, right? So similar to that, our students have some very unique strengths and talents. We have one student who reads like 200 to 300 books a year. We have another student who is very, very skilled at making cardboard models, right? Like trains, cars, houses out of cardboard. We have somebody who has everyone's birthday memorized. We have students who are very talented in the arts, right? Music. So all of our students have some very unique gifts and strengths, and that is a sort of a common trait, right, with people with autism, is that sometimes they have a very narrow focus or a very narrowed like talent, right, in a very sort of niche thing, if that makes sense. Which is not unlike, I guess, non-autistic people, right? Everyone has their strengths and talents, right? But I found that, I don't know if this is the case or not, but just, do people with autism have more niche, like unusual gifts? Yeah, it's hard to say. But I remember when I was in high school, there was a guy with autism in my class who was just insanely good with directions. Like, he could tell you all the turns, all the roads that you would take to get to a certain destination, or he'd like remember your phone number. So just a very interesting fixation kind of, I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyways, see what I said about the tangents. I can't always find the right words. Anyways, okay, so that's the first positive. And so another positive that I feel like I've observed, and this has maybe less to do with the students we work with, but my coworkers. This is more to do with my employees. And I don't know if it's just human services in general or something about just where I work, but I work with a lot of very empathetic people. And a lot of these people have, really good hearts and are just very kind people. And it makes my job a whole lot easier when I know that I'm going to work with people that I enjoy being around. So that's a huge plus. And I do also want to add that just the relationship aspect of my job is quite fulfilling. So getting to interact with our students, their support staff, their families, our coworkers, just having a job that's super interactive and conversational, for me, I feel is very well suited for my skill set. And with that being said, it's also just every day I get to sort of inadvertently work on my conversational skills and my interaction skills, my communication, right? Just by talking to our students and teaching and talking to, coworkers. This has all been very, very good for me in that regard. A third thing about my job that I quite like is the variability. I'm not doing the same thing for a whole shift. As I mentioned, sometimes I'm teaching, sometimes I'm assisting, cooking, sometimes I'm going on a field trip off-site, sometimes I'm at the computer, planning for lessons or doing some administrative stuff. So that variability kind of keeps me engaged. Now, not every day is super, super stimulating, and some days are more exciting than others, right? But having that variety, I quite like. So now I know that a couple of these positives that I mentioned are maybe less connected with the direct interactions with our students with autism, but it all kind of is linked, right? I do want to say that before I get into the challenges, I do want to say that I do not, or prior to this job, prior to working at this nonprofit with people with autism, I did not receive any formal training with regards to autism, and none of the coursework I took in college related at all, maybe with the exception of some psychology stuff, but we never really specifically talked about people with autism. I studied sociology in school, but I'll be honest, I remember like almost nothing from college. So I think my personality is pretty well suited for this job. But anyways, again, before I digress too much, I want to talk about some of the challenges that I've come across while working in this position. If I do think of some positives or that I missed, I might jump around, but I'm going to try not to. I did write a script a couple of weeks ago for this, which I scanned over very briefly before I hit record, but I'm kind of just winging it right now. So I want to talk about challenges. So firstly, engagement is quite difficult. I found that for most of our students in the classroom setting, if you do not prompt the student or call on them, they perhaps won't engage. So what I try to do a lot in my classes is try to offer a lot of different activities, right? I don't like just straight lecturing. I like to pose discussion questions, and I like to call on students one by one by their names. I don't like to just ask an open-ended question like, what do you think what do you think is the role money plays in your life? I don't like to ask something open-ended. I like to say, Tony, what do you think, for example? It's hard sometimes it's really hard to gauge sometimes if the student is engaged or not. You can't tell, right? You can't tell how much they're processing, how much of the information that they're actually soaking in. And everybody is sort of everybody's on different levels of the spectrum, right? And so maybe one person is digesting the concepts you're teaching, and one person is just kind of just zoned out, in their own minds. You can't really tell, right? So that's why I try to vary the activities up. I try to, hand out a lot of worksheets. And recently I've been doing some more group activities. So yes, that's the first challenge, engagement. Secondly, for a lot of our male students, I almost feel like it's a little bit of a crisis, right? Maybe not just with people with autism, but maybe just people in general or a certain age group. It's the addiction to technology or the use of the screen as a avoidance mechanism or as a way to cope. Because we're not a school, right? We don't force our students to participate. We don't grade. We don't give out like mandatory homework. We strongly encourage our students to apply what they've learned to their daily lives and their home lives, but we don't really have any sort of punishment if you don't do the assignment, right, or participate. Anyways, again, without going on too much of a tangent, lately we've been a little bit more strict about technology use, but we are pretty relaxed when it comes to students using their phones and iPads in class. Most of our students are quite attentive, or seemingly attentive. Like it's a small amount of students who go on their devices during class, but that small amount of people who go on their devices in class usually are on their device for the whole class, because literally I think they're so addicted, so dependent on the screen that they just have to have it in front of them. And those are the students that are difficult to engage. And with that being said, there are also so many students who, though they're attentive in class, as soon as they're in the hallway or out of class, they just kind of go back on their phone. But anyways, I'm losing my train of thought. So yes, to my point of just technology use amongst our students with autism, that is a huge challenge, because a lot of them, I know that when they go home as well, they're just glued to the TV or glued to their iPad, glued to their phone, on the couch in their bedroom. So this is similar to engagement, right? How do we, push them to kind of taper off these bad habits? Because, when they're in class, they take a 50-minute class or an hour class with us, and maybe we're teaching good habits, and maybe they're actually doing what we tell them to do in the class, but then when they go home for the next 8 hours, 9 hours, however long, it's all negated with whatever bad habits they have at home. So, technology use, engagement. So our third challenge that I've observed is comorbidity. So this is the presence of multiple different conditions, right? So we have a lot of students with autism, of course, and also some pretty intense and severe mental health struggles, like anxiety, depression, OCD, whatever else. And these mental health issues are an extreme impediment to their participation, their growth, their emotional regulation, which a lot of our students struggle with. Being able to kind of center themselves when they maybe feel uncomfortable or they're being challenged, right, to participate. I had a student last week in our cooking class who he's constantly on his phone, like pacing, playing games on his phone, and he's pretty disengaged in almost all our classes. And in this cooking class, our chef had him flipping tortillas on a skillet. He was toasting the tortillas, and one of the tortillas was a little bit, breaking a little bit, but all the other three were fine. And just out of nowhere, he kind of just snapped. He's like, "I can't do this. I don't want to do this." He took off his gloves aggressively. I just don't want to do it. And that was that. And like in my mind, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was a trivial thing. Maybe that tortilla shell was a little bit torn, but it was gonna be eaten, and it didn't really ruin anything. So yes, a lot of our students struggle with emotional regulation, and it can be tough, especially in the more extreme cases when certain students have outbursts. It's so disruptive to the point where we have to remove them from the class, or it's just disrupting the whole class, and they're kind of throwing a fit. So we know that a lot of people with autism are developmentally, I don't know what the right word is, just they are maybe lagging behind a little bit developmentally when it comes to certain traits, right? And so this kind of goes into my next point of the socialization aspect. So I think this is maybe the fourth challenge that I'm going to talk about, and just noticing across the board that I think all our students, or the overwhelming majority of our students, really struggle socially, with social cues, having balanced conversations. A lot of my students, once they start talking, they can't really stop talking, and the conversation becomes very one-sided. And we teach social skills, we teach executive functioning classes, and we talk a lot about social dynamics to try and give our students the information and knowledge that will help them kind of with socializing. But again, it's hard to say what gets soaked in. And this also brings me to another question of, like, is it right or is it preferable for us to try and have our students conform to the norms that maybe don't apply to them, right? Like, there are certain social norms that us, again, neurotypical, I don't like using that word because what does that even mean? There's certain social norms, right, that a lot of people ascribe to, right, that maybe autistic people don't do well conforming to, right? And the question is, should we push them in that direction? Like, should we try and have them learn these skills, these social skills and whatnot that suit, a different perspective? Not sure if those were the right words, but they're just some questions, some difficult questions. I don't know, and I don't really have answers. But I know that I'm trying, and we try to push our students and empower them and encourage them, because we know that they're probably capable of more than they are aware of. And this also reminds me of something that one of my coworkers said. It's very important that we presume competence, right? We don't want to assume that they can't do certain things. We want to, we want to ask the question, why not? Or let's see. So, I think that's all I have to say about this topic, working with people with autism. I realize that I think I talked more about the challenges than the actual positives. But I do want to say that my job, I do not feel like, yes, there are challenges every day with my job, but it is quite a rewarding job. And, all of us at this organization, we're all, doing our best, and we're all trying to find ways to, better serve our population. And I don't think I have anything else to say about that. I'm trying to think, because I think I had one more challenge than positive, so I'm trying to think of another positive, but I think I've covered everything. I'm sure that something will come up right after I hit pause on this, but yeah, so that's all I have for today. I'm about 3 solo podcast episodes in, so I have 2 more planned, 1 or 2 more planned, and then we'll see. So if you've watched this video, thank you. Feel free to leave a comment if you have anything you want to share, and have a good rest of your Sunday.